All right, welcome to the Underdog Ecom podcast, where two ecom brand founders are figuring out in real time.
Yeah, we're not here to preach. We're here in the thick of it, making mistakes, testing all sorts of ideas, and really sharing the journey of how we've been growing these brands from day zero. Hopefully you learn a little bit, perhaps come away with some ideas that save you time and money. And so if you're tired of the same glittery D2C advice from those 9-figure gurus, you're here in the right place.
Let's get into it.
Hello, we're back. Hey there, underdogs. It's been a couple weeks. We've been running through all the things. Jack's Mr. Worldwide over there. He's been traveling around the globe trotting. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about Profit First, a little bit of a catch up on what things have been like over the last couple of weeks. But Profit First is a sort of a accounting business philosophy strategy to how to run the numbers and the books and how not to hemorrhage cash, which seems like it's all too common in this ecom D2C world. I'm guilty. So we're going to dig into that a little bit, but curious, Jack, how's your travels been? I know you visited some suppliers. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I hope everyone's tuning into this on YouTube this time round because David's shaved and he's got a fresh look. I'm hoping everyone's there to enjoy it. But yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while, I think, because both of us have been pretty busy. David especially, both of us fighting fires and things. So no, it's good to be back and recording. I think it's been I think not to get too much into tariffs, but things are changing again on the tariffs front, meaning that I think stuff is moving again.
New minute, new percentage. Oh, new minute, new percentage.
Yeah, exactly.
We're just pulling numbers out of the hat at this point.
Yeah, kind of annoying because I literally just sent stuff over to the UK to avoid tariffs, and then now I could have sent it to the US, and it's really annoying. But now I'm
unbelievably annoying.
Yeah, unbelievably annoying. Yeah, but finding a way through it.
Sorry, I was gonna say I don't know about you, Jack, but I feel like a lot of my friends and family have talked to me like, "Oh, how are tariffs affecting you?" and that sort of thing, because I'm like the business person or whatever, and it's hard to not get into it and hard to be objective and not just rant and rave about it, but mostly rant, not rave.
Yeah, also people
just planning, like people don't know that you have to plan and order and put in orders like 6 to 2 years ahead of time, and that usually blows people away. And it's like you can't plan in a business environment. It's changing every second. It's the hardest part.
Yeah, I was going to add also, people tend to like talk to you and say tariffs, like you're going to come up with some like amazing revelation about it, and it's just like, yeah, it sucks. I don't know what else to tell you. Like, it's bad.
Yep, it's like a knockout blow. How do you like getting punched in the face every day? Yeah. Anyways, enough about that.
So how are your shorts going? That's what I want to know.
Oh man, it's been so fun. Actually, what's funny is the latest prototypes have dropped, but they're coming along. I've been testing, trying to figure out the hard part about running a business, especially like this, making custom products, is it takes forever to go from idea to market. And like I've been working on these since January, basically, and designing and prototyping and that sort of thing. And that's actually probably too fast of a turnaround to try and launch them by this summer, but I'm a crazy person. And so I struggle with like decision fatigue in some ways. Do I make a 5-inch inseam? Do I make a 7-inch inseam? Can I do both? Do I start off with like a big quantity because the price is cut in half? Like I was looking at some of the numbers this morning actually from the supplier, and it's like if I do 500 units, that's half the cost of doing 1 to 200, and I want to do 1 to 200 because cost or like because the initial capital, and I don't know if they're going to do well. Like I think they'll do well, but it seems like whenever I really like a product, it doesn't do as well as I'd like. And it's an untested product category in a lot of ways for me. So I don't know how that's going to work. But I think they're definitely a popular item. I think that they are in right now. I think you can I see other brands at least running ads to them that seem to be working pretty well. And so I'm really intrigued to see what happens with them. And I'm probably going to pull the trigger soon on placing the PO and get them running. But like I got another sample in literally yesterday. Speaking of tariffs, I paid $40 for this sample of shorts, which was not fun. Because they're prototypes, and it's like, really? Now all of my prototypes are going to cost me extra money on top of it, but they're pretty epic. And these are like kind of more of a athletic type material.
Oh yeah.
See if
Yeah,
my-
yeah, yeah.
And then they've got like really cool extra breathable area down where you want extra breathability,
Sure.
at least
Yeah.
in like the thighs and stuff. Contrast, like, and then embroidery.
Yeah, that looks so nice.
Sorry, I could talk about these all day. This is not a pod about my shorts, but they're pretty epic. And so we'll see what happens.
Speaking about like trying to understand the volume, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, so I don't want to get into too much like pre-order side of things. But have you thought about doing that to kind of at least gauge, like maybe if you can give away a good enough like discount or something, just so you can get an idea of like, okay, if 20% of these are gone already, then I know that I need at least 500 or something, or something to kind of just like gauge demand, or even if it's just like start to build a bit of a wait list on it or something.
I know. Yeah, I've definitely considered it. I feel like pre-order is one of those things that sounds really nice when you start thinking about it, but by the time, like, I've done pre-orders in the past, and by the time I start thinking about a pre-order for a new thing, I forget how painful the last one was.
Yes.
And there was, it was like a sweatshirt pre-order that I did earlier this spring, and it was overdue, even though it was just like a print job, and getting emails daily with people wondering where they were because they didn't read. And so even though it's blasted all over, we've talked about this a lot, but I've definitely thought about it, been very, very tempted because I'm in a cash flow crisis again. My Amex is frozen again, and I need cash, but also like I'm kind of scared to do that because of the issues that I've had in the past. So we'll see what happens. I might, and I usually actually only do pre-orders when I've already sent in the PO to get the product made.
Yes.
And so it's more of like a funding upfront sort of strategy for me rather than like a let's gauge interest and quantities and change the quantities. So I haven't really done like a long-term pre-order where it's like, hey, place this order now, we'll get this in 3 months, and we'll go from there. So we'll see. Probably not gonna do it, but it depends on how upset I want to make Amex.
Yeah. How much you can get away with. Yeah. It's always tough. Wow.
Yeah. There's a million things to talk about what's happening lately, I guess, catch-up wise, but like you said, putting out fires, like I hinted at, cash flow issues, been spending a lot of time in ads, trying to make those work, and I feel like I've made a lot of progress to make those more profitable over the last couple of weeks, and that's been pretty exciting. Had some products actually do well in ads, which is pretty exciting, and also been getting closer to launching my fleece pullover like new products and stuff. Just always stuff happening. It's just been crazy, but we don't have to. I don't want to get into like all the nitty gritty, I guess, there, because we got some other stuff to talk about.
Yeah. I think like we wanted to get in today a bit about Profit First, and I think it's really interesting because I think Profit First is like been around for a while, and then I think recently, given how tough ecom is, I think given the fact that like lending is getting harder and harder, like borrowing money is getting harder and harder, all that sort of stuff, I think we're all dealing with that a little bit, and so it's as the harder it gets, the more like important it is just like to be profitable and have contribution margin for buying future stock. I mean, that's the end of the day what we all want. I think we don't always get there, but I think it's like a really it's a cool concept, and I think it's something that we all want to do. I guess it's just talking about like how feasible is it, our size, how do you implement in that in your business in any way? I think you were telling me before we started recording about like you had like a fractional CFO help you, which is something I've been thinking about for a while, because I'm really not a finance person, but I'm keen to see what you told me a little bit about it, but like what were you saying about that in terms of like their thoughts on it?
Yeah, basically, and I guess we should probably back up and intro the whole topic in case anyone's not really knowledgeable or like aware in the space, because I wasn't. So that's the thing, is like a couple of years ago, I didn't know anything about Profit First, was also very weak in the financial aspect of running the business, weaker than I am now, and I still feel like it's one of my weaker sides in just struggling with the financials and trying to make it all work, because it's ecom and D2C is so hard, and you have to be like basically a pseudo expert in so many different arenas, and one of them is financing, because you are trying to turn essentially, like you said, inventory into cash, and that cash conversion cycle, or whatever the fancy term is for it, you want to have that efficient and not hemorrhaging money, and inventory takes a lot of cash. And so this philosophy I got introduced through some people on Twitter, I believe. There's a book called Profit First. I read it. There's also a follow-up book that someone else wrote that was like Profit First for Ecom, now that I'm remembering, and I haven't read that one yet. But it's essentially it's a philosophy where it's kind of like envelope budgeting that you might hear about for personal finance, where you set aside certain percentages into different buckets or different envelopes, and then ideally everything's automated. And so instead of looking at the money that's in your bank account and spending it all, which can get you into trouble. And I think a lot of the situations and a lot of the like downsides to running a business and like struggling financially with it that Mike, the author, mentions in the book resonated a ton with me. I was like, oh, I've done that. I made that mistake, check. And so this philosophy was born out of that, to try and mitigate and improve the financial operations behind a business. And so like it's like, all right, you've got your money coming in, you're setting aside certain percentages into different buckets. There's like OpEx, profit, there's totally should have these up in front of me if I'm going to try and read through them. but
yeah, I mean, even if you take it, oh yeah. Well, I was going to say,
tax.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry, I have a bit of a delay. I was going to say, like, if you even take it a step backwards, like, I suppose, like, even more fundamentally, so you have, like, generally it's like sales minus expenses is profit, is like generally how we all think. And I suppose it literally is just swapping profit and expenses. So sales minus profit equals how much you can spend on expenses. Essentially, like you set your profit goal, and that is how much you can spend on getting there. Essentially, I guess is what like it narrows down to.
Yeah, it's definitely the profit first. Like the name makes sense in terms of like that's your focus, and that's what you instead of. Yeah, exactly. That's 100% it. And what's been interesting is, so I have tried to implement this on my ecom brand, and I haven't. I have the bank account set up in Mercury. It's really easy to set up these bank accounts in Mercury. It's easy to set up automations that moves the funds between the different accounts. But I'm essentially been caught in like a bad debt quicksand in some ways over the last like couple of years. And so I've been funneling everything into OpEx and expenses, and it's not the most ideal situation. But I will say I have implemented it on my other business, my freelancing business, because the OpEx for freelancing is a tiny percentage compared to running an ecom brand. And so it's way easier because my income's way higher and my OpEx is way lower. And so I do have it set up where it's actually pretty cool to watch, because then like I was able to set aside a bunch of funds in the profit account and buy a new laptop, for example, and like other sorts of like, oh, treat yourself kind of things. Like, oh, we need to go buy a bunch of diapers. I got a bunch of funds in my profit account. Let's treat yourself. Cool. So that's been really cool to see it like work. And so I do have the idea of eventually getting to that point with the brand. And I remember some folks telling me originally, like one guy wrote up a huge essay, which was really helpful. I printed it out. It's actually sitting on my desk over there, where it's like, you need to run through every single expense that you're paying on your brand and consider like it should be cut out. And unless you make a really, really good argument that it's revenue generating and should stay there, that's really, really hard to do. And I did a lot of that, and we've talked about cutting apps and cutting costs in other episodes, so check those out. But that was like part of the whole equation, was like, you know, there's so many different little costs. You really have to focus on the profit. You can't justify a cost if you don't have it in your profit account.
Yeah, I think that the premise of that is very right, in the sense that just in business in general, you can't like spend your way to success. Like it rarely ever works out. Yet we're all so tied to revenue and increasing revenue and all that stuff. Yet the problem is that revenue automatically makes you think about spending. Like it's almost like they're tied together, because the quickest way to increase your revenue is to spend more. I mean, it gets to the point where it's a bit like it's like that saying about like buying revenue, and essentially you end up getting into the cycle where you are literally buying dollars, because you're spending money to get money, and every business has to do that to an extent. So it's almost like a toss of a coin sort of thing, as the other side of a coin, where you have to be profit minded to some extent, whatever type of business you have. And that's a mistake I've made as well. Like, I think that, and that's the problem with debt. I think debt makes it really, really hard to be profit minded. I think that's where it makes it really hard, especially with ecom, with very straight, like very different cash conversion cycles. You're getting debt into the business. Your bank account is high, low, going up and down in massive waves from one week to the next. It is very hard to understand, like, whether you're being profitable. I think profit first as an idea of like, well, I just set this money aside. Once it's in a separate bank account, like what's left over is what you can spend. So in some ways, that, like, you know what your expenses are, and you know what you can spend. But it is really hard when debt comes into play, because it starts to, especially things like, we've talked about this, but like revenue, like seller financing, revenue financing, all that sort of stuff through Shopify Capital and Wayflyer and all sort of stuff, because actually it completely depends on revenue, the length of which that debt accrues, and how much you end up spending. So really, forecasting for that is really difficult. And so that's something I've really struggled with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you implemented profit first in your business at all?
So it's interesting, because in Cancha, when I started in the UK, we have a thing called open banking, which is actually a brilliant thing, which I wish they had in the US. I think it's going to come to the US at some point. It's in Europe, it's in the UK, and essentially banks can talk to each other, and like funds move instantly, like it's within seconds. So someone literally sends you money. It's not like an ACH transfer that takes, sometimes days. It's literally immediate. Like the second you send it, the second it shows in the bank. It's because the banks are allowed to talk to each other in Europe and the UK. And for that reason, basically in like some of the UK banks, you can set away what they call spaces or pots in your own bank account. And so you can set aside money. It's almost like a separate, like, savings versus checking account. But like and when something spends, it won't take it from those like mini accounts within your own account. So you can sort of like, and you can do it instantly as well. So what's in there is actually what's in there. It's not like delayed. Since setting Cancha up in the US, even with Mercury, like, which is what we used, it's not that accurate, like what's in the bank account, in terms of like on a minute by minute, or like day by day, even day by day to an extent. But so I think it is possible. It's not quite as easy as it was with like our UK bank account, like setting funds aside, knowing that they're there. But I was doing that for a little while. The problem is, it's like, when you've got to pay a supplier, that, like, you get into this situation where you're like, well, what am I going to do? Like, you either don't pay them, and then like you've got no stock, and then you can't sell, and then it just goes like that, or you just say, I'm gonna have to break the rule. The problem is, you break the rule, and then that is the reason why you're breaking the rule is because you're not following the rules. So it's like, it just yeah.
You can get into I feel like that's where I got into like a cycle of like, oh well, I'll just allocate all the percentage into the OPEX to, like, because I need to pay those things, I need to pay the suppliers, like, and then I've got too much inventory on my books, and so like I get caught with that, and there's just so many moving pieces, and it's like you sort of like fudge it a little bit, like, oh, I'm going to break my profit first mentality a little bit here. And it's also, you asked earlier about, I had hired a fractional CFO like a while ago to help dig into all the numbers. That's an area I'm weak on, so I was like the idea was to have him come in and help out and give a lot of insight, which he did. And I was talking through profit first with him, and you asked about that, and basically he had kind of said, like, you need to be careful because there's not one rigid structure that will work for every size of business. And like, he was like, I see this a lot with entrepreneurs and startups and stuff, like they're trying to stick to a certain philosophy, which is good, but also doesn't make sense or doesn't work 100% for their side of that size of the brand, or like what they're trying to do in that moment. And I think we've kind of talked about that in some ways, many times. And I feel like that's one big learning I've had over the last 5 years or whatever, running the little tiny brand that I have, is like, everything online does not apply to every brand. And actually, another perfect example of that recently was ads. I started designing these like basically vintage Patagonia magazine ads, inspiration wise, and they're the opposite of what D2C Twitter says for building ads, and it's like the opposite of what you typically see in ads, but it's overly designed. There's like so many words and that sort of thing, and they're doing well for me. So it's kind of just like you got to do what works for your brand, and you should pay attention to ideas and principles and that sort of thing, but know that at the end of the day, like it can't stick 100%. I think this is particularly hard when you don't have experience in ecom. Like I didn't have going into this and didn't know how to run a business. And so it makes sense. You turn to these ideas, you turn to this book, like you turn to Profit First, you turn to these things that have been battle tested and have been from people that have experienced a lot more than you have. And so you try and adhere to that. I tried to adhere to that. And so it makes sense to try and apply that to your situation. But I mean, everything's with a grain of salt. So it is kind of tricky, but that doesn't really, I feel like that doesn't help people that have been like, I've been there years ago in those shoes where it's like things work, but they don't work completely. So you just have to know what works for your brand. It's like, well, how do I know what works for my brand and me if I don't know, you don't know till you know kind of thing.
Yeah, I think also the thing about ecom is, which is I think different, or just inventory based businesses, we just like go with that, is that you do also get big payoffs for taking risk. Like for example, over ordering on stock, but then in Black Friday being able to sell out of all that stock. If you'd under ordered, you could have potentially made half the amount of revenue during that time. But if in the summer when sales were slow, if you didn't take that risk, you'd be struggling when it came around to big sale peak. And that's like the crux of the problem with ecom, is that you have to think backwards and forwards always. Like you have to look historically, but you also look ahead. And if you think too much on historically, then it's hard to move forward. But if you almost guess the future too much, you can also make some bad moves. So it's like I just feel like I'm constantly moving back and forth between, okay, what did we do last year? But wait a minute, but we're doing something different this year, so we can't completely look at last year, and then that sort of thing. So I think with software or something, you've got this slightly more regular income, or even personal finances. I think Profit First personal finances is just like amazing way to run your finances, because you've got a regular, assuming you're getting, you're not like us and we don't like half not pay ourselves half the time. But
Yeah.
if you've got a proper salary, yeah, exactly. If you've got like a regular salary coming in, I think this is like an amazing strategy. Just set aside like what you want to have, like what you actually want to have set aside for savings or whatever, and then you can only spend up to that limit, and that's just the best way to do it. But with e-commerce inventory based business, I've really struggled with that. Yeah, it's just really, really tough.
Yeah, it's definitely a really complicated business model to try and like apply that to. And that's where I mentioned that book earlier where it's like Profit First adapted for ecom. Now I want to go grab that off my bookshelf and keep reading it, because that was essentially trying to answer that question, because it is, yeah, that like complicates it so much more. And I think there's so much focus in the ecom D2C world on quote unquote scaling, which I don't love to use, or just like endless growth, or, I want to be the brand that 100x'd my revenue day over day or whatever. And that means like over focusing on that is dangerous and can get you into trouble. And I've bought into that too many times in the past. And it was more just with me. It was like chasing that dopamine hit of seeing the order count go up every day. Like, 5 orders today. Ooh, 10 orders today, but not paying attention to contribution margin, not paying attention to net profit, like those types of ideas where it's like, this is the numbers that actually matter on the business. And we've actually both talked about this, but we're both sort of looking at bid caps and other ad strategies to try and pay more attention to profit as sort of a follow-up to this Profit First model, where it's like, no, we need to focus a lot more on profitability, and that needs to be more of a North Star sort of metric than like just order count or revenue or whatever. I was going to say, I feel like you've jumped around a good amount on Profit First, but part of the elements of Profit First that I really liked was it would set aside percentages into different things, and then that changes over time as the business changes. And so he's got a section of the book dedicated to that, where it's like, this changes as this percentage changes as the business changes, that sort of thing. Setting aside money for taxes, because I've definitely got in trouble in the past where it's like, oh shoot, taxes are due, quarterly taxes, and I don't have any funds for them. Like, what do I do? And when I first started setting aside funds for that, And then when it got to tax day and I saw that money sitting in the bank account, that was a pretty nice feeling. Like, it was really nice to be prepared for the future in that way. So there's definitely a lot of little things that I've been sticking to from the profit first model, but on a high level, generally the structure is, at least for my brand where it's at right now, which is struggling. It's been a struggle.
It's funny because in the UK we have a thing called VAT, value added tax. Essentially, on a sale or a service or product, there is tax included in the product price. But unlike in the US, where the customer pays that tax on top, in the UK, the tax is embedded in the product price. You have to, and then you then remit as the business that tax to the government. So essentially, the tax is included. So the price that someone sees is the price included of tax. But what happens is, whether you're an inventory business or a service business, or whatever it is, like, what happens is that inevitably you don't set that aside because it looks just like revenue coming in. And I've done this so many times. Where, and every quarter you have to pay back that tax. It might be thousands. Like, you might pay back that tax over all the sales you've made to the UK. We do. I think I mentioned this on the pod before. We share some services with some other businesses, but because I have contractors who they invoice me from abroad, so there's obviously no tax, everything like VAT tax. They're not in the UK. But then when I bill those a couple of other businesses that they pay VAT to me, so I get this money in and I think, oh great, the money in, and then like 2 months later I'm like, oh god, I owe $6,000 to in tax, and it's like it hits me every single time because I don't set it aside. And it's like a perfect example of like, you absolutely have to set it aside, otherwise you get in this like difficulty every time.
Profit first. All right, let's run it. Set up those percentages. Oh, it sounds kind of like sales tax, but like way more invisible, where it's like, oh shoot, that needs to be taken out, set aside.
Speaking about the bid caps thing, just quickly, is that like one thing also is just going back, because talking about the revenue side of the business, obviously wanting to grow and wanting to like obviously see the numbers go up and all that. And I definitely agree with you. Like D2C land is always like people always want to talk about the top line revenue numbers, how many orders they've had, sales. There's like an underlying movement completely the other way, where it's like, cutting costs, profit first, contribution margin. You shouldn't spend a penny over that. And I tend to think, and I don't know if this is like if this is really revelation or anything, but like I tend to think that neither of those are correct, in the sense that if you go for top line revenue all the time, you're going to overspend. If you don't care about like what you're actually spending to acquire a customer, obviously you're not going to be around very long. I think that's probably the worst thing you can do. I also think it is overly safe to not spend a penny beyond your means when you're starting a business, because businesses are completely built on risk. Like it's all about risk. If it weren't about risk, then businesses wouldn't exist and they wouldn't do well. It's because you have to take a risk to a certain extent. And if you never take a risk, so if you say like, I don't want my marketing expenses to be more than 10% of my total revenue, the chances are your total revenue is never going to grow, and neither are your profits, because you're just maintaining the same trajectory of your business. So I really struggle sometimes when I get like where people go like hard to the other side, and they're like, no, you shouldn't be spending any more than this on your marketing. Your cost of goods shouldn't come more to this. You shouldn't buy any more inventory than you've well, sometimes you have to take you have to go for it, because that's how businesses grow. And so it's a tough one.
It's hard when there's so much extremes, and I feel like a lot of times in the world in general, people gravitate towards extremes these days, and it's like everything there. You don't want to go 100% probably. Like, there's a middle ground oftentimes to be had, and you're right. Like, business is built on risk. You kind of do have to be a little bit risky. Inventory takes a ton of capital up front to make that gamble, and so it's hard. I was trying to think if there's anything else that we missed on Profit First, or it's an interesting topic. I definitely suggest people checking out the book. There's endless articles on the website. You could probably even ask ChatGPT to like help you implement it, that sort of thing. I'm hoping I can get there where it's like fully, I feel like my implementation percentage at this point is very low. And so I'd like to get like to a point where I can say, I've got 50% of it implemented. Like I'm focusing a lot on that, and it's a thing that's happening. So maybe we'll check in on that in the future or something and see how it's going. But it is a good idea in general, I think, to focus on the profits. And like you're saying, contribution margins, that sexy word that everyone talks about and throws around, and that is something that a lot of people focus on, but probably could use more focus. I know I've made that mistake before where I haven't focused on it. So I'm just future David talking to past David, basically.
Yeah. But I think one thing also like that is definitely been a big takeaway for me is that like maybe on the marketing side of things specifically, which is where a lot of our money goes, apart from like maybe just after cost of goods sold, it's then marketing. I think one thing I've tried to think about is that maybe the best way to look at it is that actually what a lot of people try and do is they try and like they say, for example, meta ads, they're trying to like put a lot of energy into basically trying to get like basically hit a margin that makes sense for their business. But they spend a lot of energy and a lot of resources doing it. And I think that's part of the game, definitely. I think you've got to get better at, better ads, better creative, better landing pages, trying to bring that cost of acquisition down. But I think brands that do really, really well, it's not because they've aced that. It's because they've got other sources. They've put effort into things that are harder to do from an effort perspective, from a time perspective, but they reap the benefits because they're not paying a premium because they have taken the time to do it. You see, like something like I was speaking to Eric Bandholtz from Beard Brand the other day, and like his YouTube following, right? I mean, it's insane like how good their YouTube following is, but that has taken a ridiculous amount of effort and time to build up, of which most people aren't willing to do. And that's why they're able to reap the benefits of growing their business through a channel that isn't costing them an absolute fortune on every sale. It doesn't mean that they can't run ads or they aren't spending money on ads, but I think that's the key, is like understanding that if you just try and like beat the game, like just from a case of like trying to like make the numbers work every time just about and do what everyone else is doing, it's really hard. But if you can find other sources, and I say this having not done it myself, so I'm not like trying to preach, yeah, but I do think like that's what my focus is trying to be on now, is trying to find interesting ways to kind of to grow a business without just trying to do what everyone else has done, because I think that's kind of maybe how you can do it without really overextending the business.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like basically figure out what works for your brand, your business, and focus on that. I do think caveat is like 90% of brands should be focused on Facebook ads, because that's like the acquisition engine that works the best for most people. And that should be an important part of every brand's acquisition strategy, unless it doesn't work or doesn't make sense. Like most brands basically should be focused on that. But you're right, like focus on what works, find what works, focus on that, and like double down kind of thing. Ignore the noise, just keep digging in. And hopefully that will pay off.
Yeah.
You want to wrap this up? I think we're kind of at the end of time here, trying to keep these on the shorter side, 30 minutes or so, more snack bite information for y'all out there. But you want to wrap us here?
Yeah, thanks for listening in, and thanks for waiting. It's been a little while since we recorded the last one, so appreciate you guys tuning into this one, and let us know what else you want to hear about, and we'll definitely talk about it in one of the next episodes.